Hello, and you're listening to Screen Tones, a webcomic podcast. There's a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the sum of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area we call Webcomic Time.
Just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday said tomorrow. So just do it! Make your dreams come true!
I was just looking at the show notes and trying to read my little script. Okay, here we go. Hello and welcome to Screen Tones, where we talk anything and everything webcomics. Today, we're going to be talking about Webcomic Time and all the fun stuff that goes along with it. I'm Delphina. I use she, her pronouns, and I make the webcomic Somnolus.
I am Verathane or Allie. I use she, they pronouns, and I make the webcomics Chiralt and Witchwood.
And my name is Crispy. My pronouns are she, they, and I make the webcomic Ghost Junk Sickness.
And I'm Claire, also known as Clam. My pronouns are she, her, and I work on the webcomic Phantom Marine.
Excellent. So, webcomic time. Webcomic time is kind of what we're calling the phenomenon where you think a scene is going to take a week and it takes a year or longer. Um, and the reader's experience is definitely one aspect of this, but you also have to think about yourself as the creator too. So, what do you do? How do you plan your life around this? And how do you take the temperature of your comic and course adjust accordingly? So, Thane, how far along are you in the story that you're currently working on?
So for this question, I have two different answers because I have made two comics. And my first one, Chiralt, I finished. So I'm all the way along on it. And
Yeah.
it's kind of been wrapped. And I experienced that whole wild journey from start to finish. And after its conclusion, I thought for a while, I should maybe take a break or do something much shorter that would not take 11 years to finish. And instead, I immediately jumped into another 1,000 page long epic because, of course, that's just my only setting, I guess. So in Witchwood, I started planning it almost immediately after finishing Chiralt, and after about a year or so of planning, I started working on the story itself. And 3 years later, I'd say I'm probably about a third of the way through the story, maybe getting close to halfway. It's a little hard to pinpoint because I have a plan from beginning to end, but it always tends to get shorter or longer than I expect as I work on it. But I
Yeah,
think that's about how far I am.
yeah, that's kind of the aspect of webcomic time. But it does seem like between Chiralt and Witchwood, you have like if you feel like you're already halfway through Witchwood, then you might be like doing a little bit faster. Maybe you have a better grasp on what your outline is there. I don't know.
I think I am doing it faster.
But it's good. Crispy, same question. How far along are you in the story that you're currently working on?
We celebrate our anniversary every June 7th. And this year we just actually celebrated our 7th anniversary working on Ghost Junk Sickness.
Congratulations.
It feels thank you. It feels longer always, again with webcomic time working on this because uh, doing the pre-work, I guess, beforehand took even longer, but actually getting into the comic and producing the pages Yeah, it's been 7 years, and I'm gonna say that we're probably about we just drawn out or finished drawing out over the 1,000th page, and our series was supposed to be about 8 books long, and we are currently into making book 6. So yeah, it's it's happening.
Oh gosh. Do you think you're gonna keep it to 8 books or
I really hope so. We actually cut down a lot, which I highly recommend to constantly kind of look over your work, and it will change. But it was originally actually supposed to be 9 to 11 books, and we've cut down quite a lot. So again, I'm really aiming for 8, maybe 9, but I'm really thinking it's going to be 8 books.
Okay, well, good luck with that. Clam, tell us about Phantom How far along are you?
Oh gosh, not far enough. um, but that's always the story. I am what I thought was about a third of the way through. I envisioned Phantom originally as 10 chapters. That is now expanded to 15, and I'm on chapter 5. So I feel like I'm comfortably maybe a third of the way through, if not a little bit less, because my chapters are getting longer, but I am also getting faster. So it's kind of become this interesting trade-off of like speed, and I also feel like I can now pace things a little bit more comfortably. So I am expanding what I'm able to do per chapter. But I have been working on this thing since 2015, so it has been 6 years now, and it'll be 7 years by the time I guess my first volume comes out, hopefully in 2022. That's my plan. But it's yeah, I my process is very slow. I've learned a ton. I also draw a lot of crowds, so I've been
Mad respect.
exactly. I've been held back by several things. I also, yeah, I also have a job that demands a lot of overtime. So I'm like, oh gosh, I can't predict exactly what kind of free time I'll have. So a lot of things go into why it's been so slow. I have reached almost 200 pages, so that's awesome. But yeah, still a long way to go. But I think I knew pretty early on like this is going to take a while. So I'm just kind of strapped in for the
Yeah,
ride.
just buckle your seatbelt, make sure the tank is full, I guess.
Exactly.
Oh gosh. For me, Somnambulus is 2/3, 3/4 of the story through, maybe. It's so hard to tell. It's been going on for 11 years, and I've been doing 2 pages a week. So yeah, I'm climbing up to that 1,000 page club. High fives to Crispy. Um,
Yes.
it's a pretty solid chunk of time, 11 years. The story does feel like it's wrapping up. I'm trying to wrap up a couple elements, but my planning style is very loose, so it's hard to say. And I've definitely learned a lot about how much the shonen manga influence really had on like my perception of time. Because I think that's definitely part of it for me. And so the expectations versus reality thing, it's kind of interesting to balance that. I want to throw that to Thane. What were you thinking? Going in, what do you think it was going to be like, and how did that change?
Oh, so I started Geralt in 2007, which was quite a while ago now. As of this recording, it was 14 years. What's time? Um, and back then, I kind of went in with very little in the way of planning or expectation. I read a couple of other web comics, and I was deeply obsessed with manga. I was just coming out of my initial Inuyasha phase and entering my Jack and Daxter phase. Um, and I just kind of wanted to make a cool story that would have fun and maybe impress my friends. And I started drawing with fairly little planning, like maybe a month, maybe 2 months of planning before I just jumped into drawing the pages. And I was doing it in a kind of episodic format where each chapter I was trying to treat it like not standalone because I was reading so much shonen anime at the time
Mhm.
that of course it had to have a big grand overarching plot and a final villain and cool action coming up and angst and dramatic twists. I had this vague idea that it was going to go super cool places in the future. But I was in no particular hurry because I was like, oh, Inuyasha is like 200 chapters, so like, that's
Right.
normal, right?
Right.
So I just sort of jumped in and started making it, and it took. I think I was working on it for a good 5 years or so when kind of the plot hit bits that I had laid down started to actually come together in a shape that seemed to be like it started feeling like it was time to ramp things up and start answering more questions and stuff. And I entered this arc that was going to be where the first big dramatic like thing was going to happen. And that was when I realized, like right there, when I was like standing in the middle of it, like, oh, you know what? Like, I should probably know how this is going to end and like where this is going and what I'm doing. I was also like graduating university at the time, so I was also just kind of thinking like, what place does this comic have, kind of in my life as a person too, and yeah, I just kind of had to sit down and have like a really long think about what what I was doing with the story, where it was going to go. I looked at all of my outline notes, which were super scattered before that point. Like I still have never found some of those first outlines because I would write them on like just random loose leaf paper
One day you're
and then
gonna
put them
find them. They're just
somewhere.
gonna be under the couch or something like that. And
Oh, I'm sure I will, and they will be like shockingly bad. Uh, I'll throw them away without ever showing anybody. Um, but I basically whatever I could find, I ended up mostly tossing out. Like I had all this stuff about what the backstory of my main character was going to be that I was reading over again, and I was like, you know what, this is kind of lame. I don't like it anymore. And so I wrote out a whole new outline of the story, which even then it was still not like completely finished. Like it started getting vague towards the final chunk. But I drew up this like game plan for myself to be like, okay, this is how the story's actually going to go. And it was around that time that I also ran my first Kickstarter, which was another kind of well, I started planning for it then. It was another 2 years before I actually ran the campaign. But that was an additional kind of nice little hit of like, oh yeah, and other people are reading this too. And then having the that printed volume in my hands just kind of helped to support my I
Mm.
guess internal belief like, okay, I'm going to see this through. I'm going to finish this thing. And yeah, ended up doing it. I guess I should lightly touch on Witchwood cuz I've still kind of just started that one, and with the experience that I had from Chiralt, I feel like my expectations to reality has not changed as much as it did during that time period.
mhm.
Um, like because I sort of had already I had some idea of like what I was doing, uh but it's funny because I feel like I almost had like an opposite trajectory because I started Witchwood in the same mindset that I had finished Chiralton, when I was heavily in puzzle solving, like tight, everything needs to have an answer, like all of my like I need to know exactly what I'm doing at every minute.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
it almost made it like too tight because like the story was like it was definitely I was getting a whole bunch of stuff told in a short amount of time, but I feel like at least in initially it was kind of hard to regain the spontaneity that made early Chiralt so much fun to work on, where I just had the freedom
Mm.
to just do absolutely whatever. Like I was so fixated on like making sure all the details and so on was making sense and was progressing the story towards the ending that I wanted, that there was less room to kind of wiggle things around. And it took probably a year or two before I like let go of that a bit and yeah, regain some of that freedom.
Yeah, I know a lot of people like to kind of have the whole script done, start to finish, and really have a very strict outline for themselves. But it sounds almost more like um, the way you're working. You kind of get halfway in and then do whatever, and then sort of at the halfway point, look around and start wrapping things up.
I feel like that was an approach that worked really well for me for the first one. But as I've gone a little further, I do still like having a bit more of a plan going
Yeah.
in than I did on like that 1 month thing. I feel like if I was making Chiralt now, I would have condensed those first arcs at least a little more, and I could probably have told it in slightly less time. But it is
That's
what it is.
Yeah, that's the experience part of it. You're always learning and figuring things out. Um, where did I go in my document? Sorry. I just got I just got lost in the story. Crispy, same question for you. What were you going in thinking that your story was going to be,
Uh,
and how did that change?
Um, it changed a lot. I think like as an artist, um, versus like I guess an illustrator versus a comic artist, they're not the same thing. You definitely use the same facets. But again, they're not the same thing. One being sequential and stuff like that. So demanding more of a process story breakups on the page or scroll format that you ever had. So it was kind of naive of me to think that, oh, well, I can do, XYZ in illustrations that take up like a page. Therefore, I can make comics just as fast or at the same kind of level or anything like that. So I really thought that because I can draw fast, I can make comics fast. And it kind of worked in the beginning. Ghost Junk Sickness has about four other versions. Um, I'll touch more on that later, but there's there's a lot of
The
different versions of
multiverse.
Ghost Junk. Yeah. So a lot of starts and stops, but the stops being like, me changing along the way or growing up, I guess I will say. Similar to Thane, I used to just kind of go and make the comic and I would get inspired and that inspiration would keep me going and I would make like 10 pages in 2 days and just go and ink them all and think I'm this really really cool person for doing so and it's not consistent and the story doesn't make sense but I was just going and then and then years passed and the comic grew to like 600 pages. I'm still not stopping. And then I stopped and I'm like, I should read this.
Oh my god.
so, so I I read it and it's incohesive. And so I'm just like, you know, it would help if I had a plan. So then I came in with a plan with the next version after that. And it seemed to have helped. I knew where I wanted to go and I was like, okay, I'm gonna get to this certain point and I'm gonna make comics really fast. I'm uploading it to DeviantArt, like, and then I'll become like a professional mangaka because again, I was also very into uh manga growing up. That was definitely my hugest thing. And I wanted that. I wanted that so bad. One of my biggest goals was to have my own comic in book format printed on my shelf. I can say happily that I have met that
Yay.
goal. Uh, I've met it three different types of times and had the book printed several different versions because I don't know what it is with Ghost Junk Sickness, but I guess one isn't enough. But I was that was always driving me when I was doing these comics and whatnot. But again, when I started looking back at my work and seeing what wasn't polished and didn't make sense, the expectations started to kind of really break and I thought, now this sounds I don't know. I don't know how this sounds, but I thought that my excitement and my joy of creating comics was a surefire way to kind of make me quote unquote successful. I thought that my passion was the single drive for me to get where I wanted to be. And I'm not trying to like crush dreams or anything like that, but there's a lot more that goes into creating comics with that. So the current version of Ghost Junk Sickness, I am working on with my sister, and because there's two of us now, it reads much better. The art is great. We had to merge our styles to, make sure everything was cohesive and fluent and whatnot. Um, but it's much more of a solid work, and I have to keep up with having everything written out, having the entire story laid out, the scripts all done, and our projected like timeline, I suppose, for the project, so that we're both, kind of on the same page. And I think the time management and the preparations and stuff like that was definitely something that hit me if I wanted to go quote unquote pro with comics and make something that was, comparable to the things that inspired me. So just kind of like that was the reality that hit me, I suppose, was just like, okay, I love that you're really inspired by whatever you're inspired by in 2003.
Aw.
But, being being, just inspired and constantly going by inspirations isn't enough to get you where you want to be, and you're going to have to like get a little bit more real with kind of keeping with an aesthetic and keeping with the choice and stuff like that, and just solidifying exactly what I wanted to do with that whole thing. Gosh.
But that's cool though, because you have an accountability partner, it seems like that kind of changed a lot of your process too.
Mhm. Mhm. 100%. Like, um, having somebody else who works on the comic really does keep me accountable for the things that I do. And it's really cool because I have different strengths and weaknesses, and so does she. And my weaknesses are pulled up by her strengths. So I think that's just like, I'm really lucky to have that in the comic that I make, because webcomics are usually one person who does everything. But while Laura's working on character design, like I really like environment design or mechanical design and stuff like that. And where she doesn't like inks as much, like I love inks, and you know what I mean? Like it balances out with that. So I'm really happy that, I mean, the reality needed to punch me in the face if I wanted to go anywhere. But also, I'm really glad that the reality check also kind of leveled me out in what I was really good at.
Yeah. It sounds like such a learning experience.
A hundred
Yeah.
percent.
So Clam, what were you going in thinking your comic was going to be, and how did that experience change for you?
So oh gosh, I started it because I was bored one summer. I did not really plan on doing anything in particular. I just remember I was like, okay, it was my first summer being part of the animation industry. I just gotten my first long gig, and I was like, I want to make something for myself. What can I do? And I wrote a couple things out, and one of them was do a one-shot web comic. And I was like, that sounds reasonable. But as everybody knows, you start a one shot, and there is a high likelihood that you're like, I love this world. I want to do more with it. Let's make it a whole universe kind of
Well, I mean,
thing.
Phantom Marine is so rich in the lore and stuff too. So, I mean, I think that was inevitable. I'm sorry.
Well, it's strange because I didn't intend for anything like that. I wanted to keep it very small and very kind of self-contained, with kind of a hidden depth, I guess. And it kind of still ended up that way. Like the whole story does not take place over a very long time. It doesn't have a huge giant cast of characters. It's pretty self-contained. all things considered, like it's still got incredible depth to it, but yeah, it kind of still has the makings of that sort of thing. I think the thing that surprises me most is how little has actually changed over the course of making it. Because I started it, I had ideas, and then as soon as I kind of hit on the plot line, I was like, I know what beats I need to hit. I know how this ends. That was incredibly important, and that's actually been incredibly important all the way through. Like, I know the ending, and a lot of people don't. So I've always had this kind of trajectory where I've been like, I know the direction, I know what's coming, and it feels more like I'm sculpting a story rather than like I have to produce something. Like the thing is there, I just need to find it, and I need to kind of go through different layers and chop things into little bits and be like, okay, I need to find the arm, I need to find the leg, you know, where is it underneath all of that stone? And it's worked out that way for me. Like, there's a lot of things that I did not know about the story going into it, but now I know. Like, it's a weird phenomenon, kind of yeah, digging and finding things. Like, as long as I had a solid baseline, I was like, I can work with this. I know kind of the core of the story, and I can find the little nuggets beneath it. So yeah, it started out as just kind of a thing on a whim, but it's evolved into something where I'm more surprised by how consistent it's been. And looking back, I'm just kind of like, I didn't know what this story exactly was at the start, but I knew what it was. I knew what it felt like, and that's what helped me a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you knew the direction, and that like carving away at the marble block to try to find the sculpture underneath is so cool, because it seems like once you finally get the shape of it, once you finally find that one plane that's like, yep, there it is. I knew it was down there.
Exactly. Like, those moments where you figure it out are the best. They're so good because you're like, I know there's a solution here. I have to get from A to C. Where is B? And when you find B, you're just like, oh, oh, it's perfect. Thank you. Thank you, brain.
Yeah, and your brain kind of works on it too, like in the background. Like, it might take a while, but it does finally find the solution, and I think that's so cool when it finally clicks, and you're like, "Thank you, I knew you could do it, brain."
Yes.
That's so awesome. My webcomic Zombulus, it's a world hopping story. And like everyone else here, it's firmly rooted in my manga background, because webcomics weren't a thing when I was getting into comics, but manga sure was. And gosh, it could go on for 20, 30, 40 books. I had this very adorable and naive idea that my comic would be 20 chapters long, 20 books. Each chapter would cover an entire arc in a different world. Oh goodness. So then I finished my first chapter, which took a year and a half. That made me do some math and figure, okay, yes, if I stick with this approach, it will take forever. And a lot of the other side characters that I was introducing in my one shot arcs, there's a immortal king in the first chapter of Zombulus who desperately wants to die. He's been living for 700 years and he's just done. And a lot of people thought, okay, well, that's the main character because she's spending so much time. She spent 100 pages on this. And then I'm like, no, that was just one arc. Oh gosh, people think this comic is about this guy. Um, okay. So so that was more focus and attention that I wanted on these minor, supposedly minor arcs. So after about 3 years, I really did try to focus on fewer characters, fewer elements, and it still took too long. So after another 3 years, I just decided, okay, let's try to finish the plot with the pieces I have on the board. It's been another 5 years because that's the kind of writer I am. But by now, it's just been a routine so long. it's just going to take however long it's going to take. That's where I am right now. So a lot of Somnolus has been learning about where my strengths are, how I work, and what makes me happy. Because I'm floundering a lot. I'm finding a lot of things that like I'm doing wrong, but I'm having fun on the way. And I also found what's interesting too is I've had opportunities through my webcomic collective Spider Forest. We do an anthology every year, and I've done a couple short Somnolus stories, 6 to 8 pages, I think. And trying to keep it short is like pulling teeth for me. Like, writing short is hard. It's a different skill than the skill I have. And it teaches me a lot about like both how to make my other stuff shorter, but like what I can do when I give myself the room. Um, so yeah, just keeping an eye on that and trying different things and seeing what makes me happy has really been part of the process. And just finding out where my strengths are. So that's another thing because Thane, you've wrapped up a comic, and I'm super curious how you decided to make that call to wrap up the story, and just in general, how does a creator make the call to wrap up, reboot, redo, or even abandon a project if it takes too long?
So the call to wrap up Geralt, I made about 5 years into the story, and it was not so much like a I need to do this now kind of thing as a I need to make myself a game plan for the future. And then as I was kind of executing the rest of it, uh, wrapping it up just kind of happened as a natural consequence of that decision. But I've definitely seen a lot. I read a lot of other web comics, and I've seen all the various fates which web comics can fall to. And I've seen like different creators make choices for all kinds of different reasons, and I do feel like uh, in an alternate universe, a different me might have made the decision to stop the comic at that point. Uh, Around 2012, I think, was when I was doing the most hard thinking and kind of feeling the most kind of down about it. And like, I mean, maybe in another universe that could have been the right call if I'd had another story that I was more excited about, or if I felt like my personal like life that I'd grown too far away from the original story to turn it into something that I could still be excited about.
Hmm.
Um, and as it happens, I did figure out a way to kind of keep myself going on it. And I didn't end up rebooting. I did because it took so long, and there were I think 7 years in between drawing chapter one and printing chapter one, or actually the whole first volume. Really, it was 152 pages, and all of it had been drawn like years before the printing date. So of course, when I was looking over the art to make sure that it was all cleaned up and the right size and everything, a lot of it was it was a little too old for comfort. So I went in and redrew a bunch of it. I didn't redraw it in its entirety, but I know that's relatively common for creators to kind of redraw chapters one and maybe more once they
Hmm.
go in for their first print run. And I feel like that's kind of a reasonable time frame in which to kind of redo a beginning. It's maybe a bit different from a full reboot, but like just kind of going back over early material, maybe like there's a scene that took place in like 5 pages that could become three because there's so many like panels that are not really pulling their weight, or like, oh no, I drew this panel and the anatomy is so awkward it's hard to tell what's happening. Just gonna redraw that one and then splice it back in. But little fixes like that were kind of what I did to clean up the story and bring it more in line with my newer material before I went to print.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense though, because Kickstarter or print comics have such a different audience than web comics sometimes. So making sure you're kind of putting your best foot forward and using that opportunity. It can be very good.
I feel like the really, really cool thing about working with webcomics is that everything happens live, essentially. Like, you do, like, however pages updating or episodes with different formats, and then you get to instantly get feedback from creators and comments and stuff like that. So that's always a good way to indicate, I guess, engagement wise, to see where you are with the comic. And I find that when I start to get comments, or if I get comments where a scene is taking too long or something doesn't make sense because they have to constantly reference back, which 100% is webcomic time, regardless of how short a scene
Mm-hmm.
is. People will forget because they're also reading a million different comics at once. And say you are also updating 1 to 2 pages a week, it they do need to have rereads sometimes. But if something is just not clicking and something didn't hit the way that you could have done it, I always like to pay attention to those. Actually, recently, we've also been redoing a lot of Ghost Junk work because we are prepping to once again reprint yet another version of this comic into an omnibus, which would include both volume 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
So we did a lot of restructuring with the bubbles. Again, did a lot of cleanup, and there was times where we had actually submitted some chapters within a small critique group that I have with friends to help get feedback to make it stronger. And oftentimes it was like, hey, you could make this more condensed. And I remember specifically in chapter 3 of Ghost Junk Sickness, there was a scene that just got, like, it went on for so long, and I'm like, back there, Delphi, you'd said that it's really, really hard to write like a short comic.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that in my bones, where I'm just like, I don't know if I have the capabilities to write like a 6-page comic.
It's
Like,
a different
I
skill. It is a completely
it
different skill.
So
is
hard.
100%. It is hard. So, like, I was thinking about that, and I'm just like, we're long winded because we want to get as much as we can, because you have this platform to tell the story and to get all these different angles. You want people to talk about your comic or love your characters or whatever. So it's easy to get lost in the sauce, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, like, when you see this lack of connection, or even to yourself feeling like you could do better within reason, because I don't think that you need to constantly reboot your story, because especially with webcomics, you're going to be growing with them. So regardless of your skill sets that you're starting now, they're going to change down the road. You're going to notice chapter 1 is not going to look like chapter 12, and so on and so forth. And that's not a bad thing at all. I love seeing the growth in webcomics. It's actually one of my favorite things that's so unique to the medium, because you're taking so much time to develop it. Um Seeing it, like, transform along with you as a person is really cool. And that's just another note to kind of look at as well, because your ideas change. And I feel like if it gets to the point where you don't feel aligned with the thought or the meaning behind your story, take a step back and reevaluate. If it's not the vision that you thought was going to be happening when you first started this web comic, and you just don't feel like it's you anymore, I think that's an okay time to actually reflect and feel like, who is this, like, what is this to me? It's not a bad thing. I think one of the biggest things that we as creators have is that time that we put into our projects. We feel like, I've spent 7 years doing this comic, therefore I have to see it to the end.
Mm.
I don't think that's the case, because regardless of what you've done, you've grown and you've become somebody else. at the end of those 7 years, or whatever. So there is something that came from that. Nothing is wasted at all. But I will say, for peace of mind, if it's something that's not resonating with your vision or with yourself, I think that that's the time that it's okay to let it go, and move from that. And I know that myself, I've had several versions of ghost junk sickness that I did when I was younger. And as I was drawing them and getting inspired and going through the motions of them not making sense to who I am now, it was okay to just reimagine and start anew, and see where I went from there.
Yeah, that's so true though, because it's just uh, uh, a lot of times we think about redoing the art. We're redoing the vision, like how it looks, and whether you drew the second eye in the same place as the first eye or whatever. But but a lot of it too is just kind of like, did this go the direction I wanted? How much longer is it going to take for me? And yeah, to your point, how does it align with who I am now?
Mhm.
And giving yourself permission to say, I did learn, I did a lot of cool things. My next project's going to be awesome because I know a lot about it because I'm taking the time to look at where I am.
Yes. Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, so cool.
It's something I have not had to actually really think about too much. I know that I have a general sense in my head of like, if something came up where I couldn't do it anymore, like, I don't know, carpal tunnel strikes, or,
Ooh,
you
yeah.
know, I don't know, job or life just gets too hectic, like, I have kind of some exit strategies where, like, I would still want to tell the story, but I always tell myself, if I can't physically tell it as a comic, like, they're, writing it out is actually also very hard, but it's not drawing it. So I would love to, I kind of have a jumping off point where I'm like, if I can't draw it anymore, I would love to still write it. Like, I actually I wish more people would do that, because I feel like a lot of people still, they do really like their stories, they just find themselves, they can't tell it in a certain way because of the time commitment, or maybe their work got found through the comic and now they're a professional and they're making awesome professional things, but they just can't, they don't have the time to dedicate to their original project. I think there's nothing wrong with stopping. I encourage people to stop if things are in the way of your original vision, but yeah, I know that I'm too stubborn to stop it completely.
Oh gosh.
So I it would take a lot to stop it. But I don't know. I I like having kind of a, yeah, strategy for, if I started falling out of love with it in some way, like, I just wouldn't do it anymore. I don't know. It's sad, but I see a lot of people where they push through it, and you can also see, you can see the quality start dropping, or you can see like the heart is not in it anymore, or at least not where it used to be. And I think there's some people where it's just like, I have to keep going, I have to do this, people are watching me, and they don't realize that most of their audience would be like, no, you could stop, it's okay, like, we, if you've got a good audience, they care about you and they don't want you to hurt yourself, or, take up what could be years of your life making something that you hate. So I don't know. I've been very lucky in that I have not questioned what I've done, very much. There's been, the odd night here or there where I'm just like, oh God, what have I done? But but on the whole, like, there's too much joy in it for me right now for me to even consider, anything to the opposite. But I think it's good to be realistic. Like, life changes, and because a lot of people start their webcomics quite young, I started, yeah, after college, so I was a little bit more, I guess, established in what I liked, what I didn't like, what I knew I could do. So if you start at like 16, like, you're going to be a different person by the time you're 20, 25. Like, you're going to be changing a lot. So I don't know, just be easy on yourself. If there is something about it that you're not having fun with, there's other things to do. Like go have fun somewhere else. It's okay.
Go see the sun, go touch some grass. It's okay.
Yes, exactly. That's what I mean. Like, oh gosh, I kind of feel bad because yeah, the summer where I started all of this, I actually did a bunch of hiking, and then that hiking kind of stopped a little bit, and I'm like, no, I encourage anybody like go out, go have fun, go do things like, and it also if you want to step back even for a bit and go on a long hiatus, that hiatus can feed your art. Like a lot of people, they don't realize that some people they come back and they're stronger. So
That's true.
there there's a lot to be said for just go with the flow. Like you might have an audience, but just you got to do something for you or else it's not the comic is not you anymore at that point.
Yeah, that's so true. And I mean, you make this point of saying, well, I'm stubborn, I'm going to keep at it. But I think you're doing a good thing too, in that you're pausing and you're looking around and you're saying, if I had a situation, if my life changed, and that kind of gives you that peace of mind that, like, you're reaffirming to yourself, like, it's okay to stop, it's okay to pull out if that's what I need to do. And that once you kind of get that kind of mindset going, then you're going to have more enthusiasm for it because you don't feel like you're chained to it.
Exactly. Yeah, I want people to be free. Like you get into a webcomic because you're excited and you're kind of doing it out of freedom. You're not bound to a publisher or an editor most of the time. So
Mhm.
it's something where you can start with fun, you can learn a ton from it. You don't have to carry it all the way through. Like it's lovely if it happens, but I mean, there's so many people where they start and they get amazing and then they move on to something else, and there is absolutely no shame in that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you brought up a point about, is my audience going to be disappointed? Are they going to, like, they're getting a free comic, they're getting entertainment for free. And a lot of them know this. Some of them might be a little more entitled, but so many of them have your best interests at heart and will follow you to wherever you go next. So just don't be afraid of it. We're making free pages, we're making free entertainment, and your audience is there for you. They most of the time they want you to be happy and healthy, and they'll follow you to different projects as you go. So there's really no shame in stopping if you're not feeling engaged. But to Clam's point, there's like a lot of ways that you can kind of re-engage when you're feeling kind of droopy about that. I mean, Dane, what's your experience with that?
So in terms of keeping myself invested in my own story, there's I mean, one of the things is just to reread your material on a regular basis to kind of stay on top of kind of what you've done. But even more importantly is to just try to touch base with the things that inspired you, whether these be like the initial things that you were into as you were kind of getting into it, or just trying to think about the underlying themes of the story and what about the story you're telling is meaningful to you that resonates to you personally, and making sure that like the things that you're writing and the things that you're drawing are conveying those scenes in a way that is meaningful and is interesting, and whether that be like rereading the stuff that something that you really love or finding a new thing that you're into now, just going outside looking around. I also recommend that, going on hikes or kiddie rides, find something beautiful that you're passionate about. um,
Mhm.
the thing with storytelling is that if it feels like a scene is boring as you're writing it and you're struggling to like get the material out, uh, you can sometimes just cut that. You don't necessarily have to throw out the whole story, but like you can reassess what you're doing with a specific scene and figure out if you even need it in the story. And cutting it might get you even closer to like the stuff that you do care about. And the thing is that if you're not into a scene, then chances are good that readers won't be that into it either. But if you are like invested in what you're doing, there's a good chance that like that'll carry through to the readers as they're going through it, and that passion will kind of see you through. One of the advantages of webcomics is the fact that they're not focus tested by a whole bunch of people to turn it into a smooth polished river stone of content that can be like enjoyed equally by the masses, but that everybody will forget immediately afterwards. It's your own personal vision, so just lean into that and do what feels the most the most pressing and urgent to you personally. And that's my
Yeah.
answer.
I mean, that's true too, because I think we take a lot of things for granted. I think we say, like, well, I have to do this scene, I have to do this, or else it's not going to make sense. And that's not always true. Sometimes when you stop and you look at it and you think, what would my story be like without this thing? Does it still work? Maybe it does. And maybe you're happier for that.
I feel
Uh,
like honestly readers are like they're smarter than you think about some things,
Mm-hmm.
and the things that will make them stop reading a comic are not necessarily that the plot is like not making sense. You might get like at the odd reader who's like, "Hey, I spot a plot hole," but like the thing that'll actually make them drop off is if the passion and the emotion stops being there. Like if that core of the story is not being conveyed. And if cutting
Mm-hmm.
some interstitial scenes that are not like giving you life as you draw them is what gets you through that process, then maybe that's what you got to do.
Absolutely. Crispy, what do you think? Do you have anything to add about how to keep your story engaging for your readers or yourself?
I definitely wanted to echo Thane's point about rereading your comic. I think that should be a staple when being a comic creator. Please read your comic and your work a lot and fall in love with it as much as you can again and again. And I think just keeping that passion in check is what kind of keeps you going. Now, initially, my original answer through the first question was talking about how I started the comic based on like my hopes that I was just really really into it, so therefore I will go places. um I still hold that true, where it's just like, again, echoing what Thane said, you will see when passion leaves a comic or a project or whatever. You will see when the heart doesn't exist anymore um in that piece. And again, I do agree. I think that that is when readers kind of drop off, because like if you're not into it anymore, they'll know. So
Hmm.
it's hard to curate your feelings to constantly be in love with a project. So I mean, if it's not there, that is a good time to have some reflection. You don't need to finish it. Echoing what everybody else said, if it doesn't make you happy, walk away, kind of thing. But as far as engaging in the content yourself, I would try to be like, you will have to be your number one fan. Especially if you're wearing all the hats, that's a lot of work, and if you're not enjoying the process, that's going to be a problem. Especially like I remember one of the first things that I heard about making a webcomic. One of our first conventions was at TCAF. I don't know how we did it. I was like, oh, what's a convention? Oh, TCAF. Oh, okay, we'll set up there. Woo! That was overwhelming.
I want to go someday. I'm so jealous.
It's incredible, please. Oh my goodness. But one of the first things I heard about comics at webcomics was at TCAF, and I remember them talking about, when you're gonna make a webcomic, expect to spend 5 to 10 years on one story. Like that's the minimum.
Hmm.
And that's the kind of dedication that you need if you want to see it through. And if your love is waning, that's going to be a little bit difficult. And that's kind of when the reboot talks come up, and the, you know, cutting things or whatever. That's when that kind of starts coming up as far as engaging with your content yourself. So it's always good to kind of just reflect on the long-term goals and see what's really, what's keeping you there. And if it's not the passion, then um but to go on to the next kind of like the other side of that with engagement from your readers, I think it's kind of like the same thing. Again, if it doesn't see that you're passionate about it, the readers will also see that. And that's when they will kind of drop off. If you're someone who says every day that, yeah, it doesn't have to be every day, that's exhausting. But
Yeah.
when you talk about your comic, show that love and people will flock to that love that you have for your comic and be genuine about it because people can tell genuine emotions 100%. If you're someone who's just sitting there saying, "Oh, read my comic, I guess it's good," or whatever,
I'm just gonna
I,
repeat my elevator pitch like every other tweet, and
yes, yes, but that's true. And you know what? I'm a reader too. We're all readers in here. We all read webcomics. That's a huge turnoff. That's a huge, huge turnoff. Like me as a reader, when I kind of see like a half-arsed, read it, I guess, like you dinguses. I'm I'm not actually going to read the comic, no matter the content or whatever. But that's the interesting thing about webcomics is that the creator is right there too.
Mhm.
So you kind of have to have that connection to be there with your piece. It's kind of like when you go to a gallery show on opening night of something and you get to talk to the artists who made the pieces during the event. But that's all the time. So it is exhausting. 100% it is. We all know that. But it is something that reflects onto the work. So if you're somebody who, again, doesn't feel passionate about the work, it'll show and it will scare people away. Because heck, no, it has 100% happened to me. I've definitely been scared away by, you know, eh, I guess my comic's okay.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's I mean, because some people are also shy or neurodivergent or whatever you got. Like, just like I don't know how to talk about my work. What do I do? How do I sound like I'm passionate about it? And I don't think it's that necessarily. I think you're looking at just being your work's biggest fan, like you said,
Hmm.
just trying to show this is what I'm working on and this is why I love it, and people will respond to that.
Hmm. Like, why have you decided to work 5+ years on this project? Like, I want to know. Like, get
Mhm.
get personal. Show me why. Tell me why.
Yeah. Tell me why ain't
Ain't
nothing
nothing
but
but a
art.
webcomic. No.
Yes. Perfect. Clam, do you have any other finishing thoughts about how to keep your story engaging for your readers and yourself?
So I actually think about this from a craft point of view, because when I'm drawing, like it takes me a long time to draw one page because I'm silly, and I chose a style that's way too intense. But it's fun when it works out. But I do kind of kick myself sometimes, so I do have to find ways to make it interesting for me. I know that I ran into that sort of problem. I guess the engagement thing when I went, because chapter one of Phantom Marine is like, oh, it's my jam. It was so much fun. It took a long time, but I was like, yes, yes, it's so much fun to draw. But then I get to chapter two, and I knew I had to have kind of a world building chapter where I go and I literally I do change perspective and I go to see other characters and I
Mhm.
learn what the world is like outside of this. Chapter one is basically like a bottle episode. Like you've got two characters that look like a lot more characters, but it's only two characters. So it's something where I knew I needed to make it. I had work to do where I was like, I need to establish why things are this way and what it's like for normal people. And that got a little boring for me. Like it was still fun, but I know that one of the number one most I guess consistent comments I get from readers is like this part drags. And I'm like,
Oh.
yeah, it absolutely does. Like at least to some people. Some people like it more than the first chapter and I'm like, that's very interesting. But it was something where now I know like I did everything I could to kind of cover it up and it worked to a point. It functions. But now I kind of know from that I've kind of come up with a strategy where like if I have kind of the job scene where it serves a purpose. I have to convey information. I have to add spice. So you have to add a page that's just fun, or like a fun aside, or something that elaborates more on some part of that information in a really interesting, engaging way. People will still be like, yeah, you're telling us stuff, but you can tell it in an interesting way, for
Yes.
sure. So I know for me it helps me too, because I it gives me little like waypoints where I'm just like, yes, I have to finish this page where not much happens, all things considered, but then I get to draw this page where I'm like, oh yes, oh it's so fun. So I having something like that to look forward to, and having them be spaced out enough, is also very, very good. I know one other thing that I am able to do that a lot of people aren't able to do is I do move scenes around. So I find
Oh.
my story is kind of modular that way. So I there one thing that I have decided very distinctly is I have two major spoilers in the comic. I'm moving one of them up several chapters in advance, because I was just like, people have guessed this already, and people are they're getting it. I don't want to hold the food away from them for too
It
long.
is
So I
time.
it is time. So I am going to do that sooner than I expected. So I yeah, give yourself treats that you're excited to draw, and that people then will be able to be like, "Oh yeah, she was excited to draw this." Yes. But then also, yeah, look at your story in a broader sense, see where things could be moved around a little bit. Like, don't be afraid to read your audience and be like, okay, yeah, they want this, they want this kind of information, can I give it to them? And if you can, give them either a nugget or the whole meal.
I know. And I mean, that's pacing, which is like a whole other thing, but
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah, it's just it's so fun for readers too, to like be on the scent of it, and they finally get uh, exactly what the answer is, and that there's just an energy in that, isn't there?
It is, yeah, there is. I because I always have those kind of two things in mind where I'm like, I don't want anybody to know one of these, but the other one I can drop it. And I know it'll help, because it kind of breaks up the story. Like if it's in thirds, and the first big drop is at kind of the third mark, and then the second big drop is at the two-thirds mark, then that kind of it feels better. So it's something where, yeah, look at your plan and see where you can, yeah, add that spice, is kind of my general, I guess, advice. My spice advice.
Spice advice. Awesome. Does anyone else have anything else to add about webcomic time? We, in true form, we have gone on very long about some very good stuff, but yeah, let's wrap it up.
I think anything as a last note, know that webcomics are definitely a time commitment, as a beast. And, again, be your biggest fan. It'll really, really help you get through the project, the largeness that it is.
It's so easy to go in inspired by like your Inuyasha or Naruto or Avatar: The Last Airbender or all kinds of like, big the stories that you love that make you want to tell stories. But a lot of those things are made by like hundreds of people and it still takes them years and you don't even see the first 2
Hmm.
years of that production timeline. So, uh keep that in mind when thinking about story scope and yeah, just kind of figure out what you can do, what your personal pace is. If you get started doing something and realize it's going to take too long, never be afraid to just like stop and reassess and drop it,
Mhm.
do something new, or like change your working method so that you can make it sustainable. It's a marathon and not a sprint.
Exactly. Yeah, and for me it's just take your temperature, like every chapter, every time you wrap up a big arc or something like that, see how you're feeling and what's going to make the next part of it exciting for you, and don't be afraid to change up your routine if that matters, because you're going to be doing this for years and years. I mean, like, if if you do the same old, it might get boring. But yeah, just keep an eye on it and stay flexible. Okay. So I think that wraps it up for today. Thank you so much for listening. I have been your host, Delphina, and you can check out my work at somnambulist.com.
I am Verathane, and you can check out my work at chiralt.sevensmith.net or at witchwoodcomic.com.
I am Crispy, and you can check out my work at ghostjunksickness.com.
I'm Claire, and you can check out my work at phantomarine.com.
And we'll see you later, slappers.
Camus.
Thomas.
Bye.
I can't help myself.
Thank you so much for listening to Screen Tones. Please subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to also follow us on Twitter at ScreenTonesCast.